Well, thank you, Mr. Lynch, and we're planning actually to talk about that, about someone who was, quite frankly, the worst labor secretary nominee in our nation's history, literally putting the fox in charge of the hen house. You can tell I'm from the city because I've botched that metaphor, but maybe Mark will be able to help me out with that. But to put someone in charge of the Labor Department who had a complete history of ripping off fast food workers, paying in some cases, in some Hardys, actually paying below minimum wage because they were falsely classifying workers. I can't think of really someone who, in many ways, epitomized the kind of greed that we see in our economy today than the former labor secretary nominee. And, you know, that actually works to a point that I wanted to raise, and because I think it's a big part of what has been happening in our American economy today. In the World War II, post-World War II era, for roughly 3 decades, we had large gains in productivity and large gains in wage growth. This is from roughly the mid-1940s to about the late 1970s. You saw workers becoming more productive, working harder and smarter and better than ever, and you saw wages growing to almost exactly the same percentage, 97% increase in productivity, 91% increase in wage growth. But then over the last 30 years, something different, quite different has happened. The productivity growth has continued. The American worker is more productive than at any point in our nation's history and is the most productive workforce in the world. That's not boasting. That is an economic fact. And yet, since the 1970s, wages have barely gone up at all. And those are the averages. That doesn't account for the fact that when you're talking about the blue-collar economy, when you're talking about those who don't have a higher education, when you control for just that group, wages are actually lower today than they were 30, 40 years ago. Now, you might wonder, well, how are CEOs doing? Have they shared in the pain? Well, 50 years ago, CEOs made 20 times what typical workers make. As of 2013, they make just under 300 times a typical worker's pay. From making 20 times more than your average worker to more than 300 times your average worker. Now, I believe in capitalism. I believe in the market. But clearly something is deeply wrong in our economy, the structure of it, when we have that sort of a situation, when workers are not being rewarded for their hard work. And, you know, I wanted to bring in here my colleague, Mr. Vesey, because I recall him talking a little bit about his family experience and the similarities to my own, and the fact that blue-collar workers like our parents actually have fewer opportunities in America today than they did when we were growing up. That's right. Fewer job opportunities for lower wages and not as rich benefits. I say not as rich benefits, actually very insecure benefits in terms of health care and a lack of a defined pension. So I'll yield now to Mr. Vesey to possibly talk more about that and other parts of the heart and soul of our blue-collar